Welcome first-time listeners and returners to the Sports Deli, where we believe that less is more. LESS stands for leadership, equality, empowerment, empathy, education, social injustice, suicide prevention, sports, and solutions. We talk a lot about white privilege, we want to mobilize, and pay it forward. The Sports Deli is sponsored by SportRx. You can give them a call at 888-831-5817 or find them online at sportrx.com. SportRx is the leader in sport prescription eyewear. They are used by skiers and snowboarders and Major League Baseball players. People all over the world use SportRx, and don't forget to enter the code DELI10 at checkout for your special 10% discount. And now a little bit about your two co-hosts, Dr. J and myself, Hootie Hoot. Dr. J is a sports junkie. He loves politics. His dad was a civil rights lawyer. His mom worked for the government. He's working on his EDD in higher education. He's got his master's degree from the University of South Carolina. He once won third place as a freshman at the University of Kentucky in a Rick Pitino lookalike contest. He loves golf. He's played in Scotland, Mexico, Spain, the United States, and he's played Torrey Pines, the Ocean Course, Pebble Beach, and Doral. He loves the All-American at Waffle House and will, once the pandemic is over, commandeer a booth at night at Waffle House and be broadcasting live right here in the Sports Deli. As for myself, Hootie Hoot, I'm from Detroit. I went to Oak Park High School. I love my Detroit teams. Loved my friends growing up on Leslie. I played 5 sports in high school. I got cut 3 times, once in middle school, high school, and in college. And the next year I made the team every single time because I was motivated and so mad that I got cut the previous year. I played JV on the basketball and baseball teams as a junior, but I didn't care because I just wanted to play. And then the next year as a senior, I made the varsity in both baseball and basketball. I give a lot of thanks and big credit and kudos to my youth coaches, Coach Clairfelt, Mr. Emanuel, Richard Maltz, Jeff Feig, Mr. Sternberg, Coach Golding. All played huge parts in my upbringing and my success. And I played 4 years of college basketball and 1 year of intercollegiate tennis. I played on the first team in the history of Goucher College in the sport of basketball. I was the first MVP in the history of the men's basketball program. I still hold a record where I made 5 out of 6 three-pointers in a game, good for 83%, a single game high, still some 30-plus years later. I went to Frostburg State and learned under the tutelage and mentorship of Oscar Lewis, a phenomenal coach. I've coached men's and women's college basketball for 23 years. I've sent dozens of players to the NCAA and NAIA levels, including 11 to the Division I level. I'm also a professional basketball skills trainer, and I give private lessons in both tennis and golf. I currently coach at the Preuss School in San Diego. It's a low-income first-generation high school in the sport of girls basketball. I have a beautiful, amazing, incredible daughter. I'm a life coach. My mom has been an inspiration to me and a huge support system during all my ups and downs in my life. Unlike John, I will not be commandeering a booth at the Waffle House once the pandemic is over, but at my favorite restaurant, the Crab Hut, right here in San Diego. And now, back to the Sports Deli. We're so honored on this 14th day of Women's History Month, roughly 34 days away from the WNBA draft, a few days away from the start of March Madness, and roughly 2 months away from the WNBA's historic 25th season, to be joined by the head coach of the Atlanta Dream, Nicki Collen. She shares a birthday with Dennis Rodman, Stephen Colbert, and Stevie Wonder. She grew up in the basketball-crazed state of Indiana before moving to Wisconsin, where she would attend basketball camps ran by former University of Wisconsin and D3 legendary Wisconsin Platteville coach Bo Ryan. Even though she reached the pinnacle as a coach and had incredible success as a player in college, she thought she was going to follow in tennis legend Chris Everett's footsteps. She also dreamed about being an astronaut as a kid. She has 3 beautiful children, including a twin boy and girl, and her husband, Tom, who coached college ball for 34 years, is, among other things, Mr. Mom. She played her college ball at Purdue and Marquette and made 4 consecutive trips to the NCAA tournament, including a trip to the Final Four in 1994 while at Purdue. And her coach at Marquette once asked her, "Why do you practice shooting so much if you're going to pass up so many shots?" She has a mechanical engineering degree and graduated cum laude. She played 1 year in Greece professionally before coming back to the States and coaching college ball for 15 years before moving on to the WNBA as an assistant with the Connecticut Sun in 2015. She's been the head coach for the Dream for 3 years, and in 2019 was named WNBA Coach of the Year. She demands of herself and her Dream team to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. You can find her on Instagram at Coach Nicki C and on Twitter at Nicki Collen, and of course on the Atlanta Dreams website at dream.wnba.com. Coach, we're truly honored that you're joining us today here in the Sports Deli.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Holy cow, I guess you did your research on me. So
Well,
trip
they
down
make
memory lane there.
it. That's right. Time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, thinking back to like Bo Ryan days, and I went to school with his kids.
Wow.
His daughter was a year younger than me, so I played a little basketball with her. But his sons were kind of more in my younger brother's age group, and they were big basketball players. So, yeah, I grew up with Bo's kids and going to his
Wow.
camps and kind of following his career for sure.
Yeah, it's a good story to know that you can start, at the D3 level and make it to that next level. And there's a lot of different ways to get there for sure. I always ask this question first because Jay Billis was on and he talked about how, as a person, his coach as a senior in high school was a good person, but he just didn't have a great experience. And Kayla Alexander, who was on a couple weeks ago, said she did have a great experience in high school. And I'm just wondering, because, as we approach the 50th anniversary of Title IX, and, I have a daughter, you have kids, obviously, a daughter. And uh, was your high school experience supported in a way where you see a lot of kids quitting now, but it encouraged you and reinforced you and made you feel empowered so that you wanted to continue? Or were there any moments where you were like, this isn't worth it?
Huh. It's really interesting, having two high schoolers right now in my house and kind of seeing what that looks like. And, I was talking to my daughter the other day about how, I felt like when I was that age, I was so consumed by sports. I played 4 sports. I was a volleyball, basketball, softball, and I played club co-ed soccer when I was in high school. And so, that was pretty consuming.
Hmm.
And I had a boyfriend type of thing. And so, I always said that, like, I think I was friends with everyone and friends with no one, which
Mm,
sounds really weird, but I think I got along with everyone, but
no.
didn't ever kind of build that clique around me. And
Mhm.
when I think back on my high school experience, I don't think of it positively or negatively. It was just kind of part of my life. Like, I have
Yeah.
so many friends in life that I've kind of had along the way, but there's not a lot of high school people that, I see or really interact other than your typical Facebook acquaintances.
Yeah.
And I think it was because I was so driven, really academically and athletically, that was my sole focus. And so certainly I would say no coaches derailed that, as I went through.
Mhm.
Starting to play back then, it wasn't as common as today, but playing AAU basketball was kind of the catalyst for me in terms of seeing what basketball could do for me, as opposed to, just playing it and being competitive and wanting to win, and being able to play and being in a national situation, and knowing I was competing against the best. And then, you just hear all the stories, and it just makes the world smaller when you have those
Hmm.
experiences. But I always say, when it comes to high school, the unique thing for me was that my volleyball coach was actually probably the first female coach I had.
Wow.
And I think back to, from Little League baseball to, middle school basketball and kind of everything in between. You had a lot of dads, helping run your youth rec programs and all of that. And then
Yeah.
ultimately, when I played high school volleyball, it was the first female that I really had. And I found that her expectations were so much higher for us, in terms of how hard she would push and what she demanded of us. And it was totally different than, my other sports experiences where I had really good people, and people that I like and could easily pick up the phone and call today and talk to. But I mean, it was that experience with volleyball that made me think, okay, when I go to college, I want to play for a female, because I wanted that experience again. I wanted someone who wasn't afraid to push me, who thought I had another level. And that was a big part of me choosing Purdue and Lynn Dunn, was because I thought she
Hmm.
was tough, but I thought she was smart and, could really push me to a different level. And it wasn't that I ever wanted to be a coach. I just found that I appreciated, um, that there was no limit on what she thought we were all capable of doing, and so we trained harder. She wasn't afraid to be straightforward with us and things like that. So I think it shaped me that way. Basketball was just the thing that I loved, so I don't think there was any coach or any person that could have really derailed that, because I was so singularly focused on where could that take me, that, if I had a bad high school practice, I was still going to go over to UW Platteville and get shots up with my dad, and so my dad was that guy that was basically, my rebounder my whole life.
That's really interesting because the first thing that came to mind was because that time when you were in high school and going into college was when women's basketball really turned a corner.
Hmm.
And typically, you think of it as the other way around, whereas it's the male coaches that are challenging you more, and young players may have a hard time with that. And for you, it was the other way around. So I think that's amazing that's was your experience, and now we see that just more and more. Whether it's Muffin McGraw, whether it's you, whether it's Pat Summit, so many amazing women's coaches, that's really in the 90s and starting in the 2000s really, started to get more prominence.
Well, when you think about, like, I mean, late 80s, early 90s, when I was in high school, gosh, you had coaches that were making like an extra $1,500 to coach a sport. They were all
Right.
teachers,
Yeah.
and they did it. And it's just different today. The high school scene is different,
Yeah.
all the way around. Certainly, a lot of schools still have requirements about coaches being, in the school system and things like that. But, I just think it was, my dad had always been the person that was my biggest fan, but also my biggest critic, so I was used to the post game rants, the play by play breakdown, but also the, you need to do this and you need to do that. And he's the one that toughened me up, so that I think when I had a coach who challenged me, and, I mean, certainly Lynn Dunn, when I played for her, I mean, you can't even say the things that she would say, now 20 years later, in a
Right.
practice. And now we can laugh about it and we can talk about how it made us mentally tougher. And I love Lynn Dunn and we have a good relationship. I texted her last week about, a player on that Kentucky team, that she's a part of that program.
Yeah.
But I mean, times have changed, and how you can actually address players and the expectations. And I always joke, back then we had goal body fats, we had goal weights, we had,
Yeah.
no one was afraid to tell us we needed to gain 5 pounds or lose 5 pounds. And,
Mhm.
we have to be so careful, kind of about all of that when dealing with female athletes today.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. So talk about your college experience. We're in March Madness right now. Your season's right around the corner. You still love watching March Madness, even though you're not in that game anymore? That's a stupid question, right?
It's funny. Like, I told people the other day, like, I just really don't watch much college men's basketball. I watch a ton of college women's basketball, and a lot of it is because of the relationships I formed over the years and the teams and
Yeah.
coaches that I still follow. And then it's just part of my job to know the players, to really be prepared for the draft and really understand who's out there and who's coming up, and what it's going to look like. And then I watch a whole lot of NBA basketball because that's literally way more of the parallel. Not that we're as athletic or can do some of the things that the NBA can do, but with the 24-second shot clock and the way teams play and utilize players and the way they coach late game situations and I would say the thing that's kind of funny, like even when I watch games, I was scouting the ACC tournament last week, and I was with my GM and I was watching warmups, and it was just driving me crazy because I thought the team wasn't preparing well in warmups. And he's like, "You just can't even sit here and not coach in dang warmups," like.
It's funny you said that because I was just listening to Doug Gottlieb's interview with Ryan Odom from UMBC, and they were talking about that very thing about how games are won and lost in layup line. And I can tell you that when I was coaching, it would drive me nuts if the players would miss layups in the layup line when I was a head coach at the college level. Now it's not so much because of where I am, but I watched intently during layup line. So I feel you.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like the thing that you find, especially when you become a head coach, is that when you watch basketball, whether it's March Madness or you're watching it a different way. You kind of lose that fan perspective at times because
Right.
you're always analyzing who's doing what and why, and whether it's from an
Yeah.
offensive perspective or a defensive perspective or what they ran and why it worked or schemes and things like that. You do that. Now, I will always be a basketball fan, and I'm as much as anyone, like my experience at FGCU, and I watched them, win the ASUN championship today. And so the
Yeah.
idea of watching, a team like them face a Power Five school in the NCAA tournament, that's fun. The underdog kind of
Totally.
thing. How does that matchup work? So yeah, I mean, when I think about my playing career, it's one of my favorite moments. I mean, we played in the Final Four my freshman year. We played in the Final Eight my sophomore year. But there is no doubt that the moment that I remember as a player more than any moment was my first year at Marquette playing when we
Mm.
upset Clemson in the first round of the NCAA tournament.
Mm.
Um, a legendary coach in Jim Davis at Clemson,
Yeah.
and a game that, it was that 5-12 upset. And
Right.
I remember that feeling in the locker room because it was Marquette's first ever NCAA tournament win, and
Yeah.
that meant more to me than being, sitting further down the bench when I played at Purdue and super proud of my experience there, but really being central to us winning a game and doing something at our university that had never been done before. I remember that moment in the locker room as much as any moment as a player in terms of how good that felt and how exciting that was. So I think there are moments that you have when you play and you're in those situations that you really don't forget, because it is 25 years later almost for me now. And it's still, I can still kind of get chills from that moment.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that must feel like, just being an integral part of the success of the team and knowing all those years of hard work have paid off. And obviously, there's a little bit of luck involved in anything that you're doing at a high level, but what an amazing experience that must have been. We hope you're enjoying your favorite deli sandwich or bagel and your favorite beverage as we listen to an interview with Nicki Collen, the head coach of the Atlanta Dream of the WNBA. Prior to her stop in Atlanta, she was an assistant coach with the Connecticut Sun of the WNBA, and her college coaching career started at Colorado State in 2001. She moved on to Ball State in 2003. She went to Louisville before going to Arkansas and then Florida Gulf Coast. Now back to this incredible interview with Nicki Collen, head coach of the Atlanta Dream of the WNBA, right here in the Sports Deli. I coached college ball a long time, and I'm a pro skills trainer now. And when we first got into this business, we were just supposed to coach. And as time's gone on, we have to be more empathetic. We have to be life coaches. We have to be psychologists, a lot of different things. And we were at a crossroads, maybe more than at any other time in our coaching histories, slightly older than you, this past summer. And so I want to come from sort of an educational standpoint, right? You have kids, and that teaches you a lot about life and how you handle situations. But What did your college coaching experience teach you? Maybe share that story initially that you were going to do something else. And Jay Billis has talked about this. Craig Esherick has talked about this. You're in the middle of making other plans. Then all of a sudden you're deciding that, okay, well, maybe I'll try coaching. And, your now husband was someone that reached out to you and said, hey,
Hmm.
I remember when I recruited you and I just think you'd be a great fit for this family of ours. And so tell us what you learned from that makes you have that it factor, because you definitely have it. You're one of 8 billion people that's a head coach in the WNBA. It's just your story is just fascinating to me.
Well, I think, it's kind of funny. Like I think back to, I used to sit in Jim Jaber's office the year I was sitting out at Marquette. And,
Mhm.
I would pop in every day because I was just a gym rat. I mean, I was that old
Mhm.
school gym rat where when class got out, I was going to go down, I was going to hang around in the basketball offices and wait, till at that time the restricted earnings coach could,
Right.
rebound for me, and then we'd play one on one. She was only a couple of years older than me, so we would just have these wars. But I would pop my head into his office and he'd say, I don't even know why you're doing this engineering thing. You're going to coach. And I would just laugh at him. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. And I have to tell you, like, the thing about it, people would ask me, why do you not think you want to coach? And it boiled down to one simple thing to me. Like, I was such, it part of it was just being a gym rat and loving the game. Like, I am one of those people that lives, breathes, like, I know that basketball has created this path to do a million things, like, it is the single thread that kind of runs through my life from the moment I started playing, that connects a lot of dots. And but I was so committed to it. I was so committed to not cheating the game and
Mhm.
loving the process, as cliche as that sounds. And so the thing that I always thought, like, I would tell my coaches, like, I don't think I can coach, because I look at the players that you coach, my teammates who have 10 times more talent, in their big toe than I have, in some ways, but they just don't want it. They don't, they think they want it, but they don't. And, I would think, wow, if she would work half as hard as I work, like, she could be a WNBA player or a pro, like, she could make a career out of this, and
Totally.
it was like, how do you, like, as a coach, I thought, I'm not going to be capable of kind of bridging that gap between how badly I want somebody to be good, or how good I think they can be, and what they want. Like, you can't make anyone want it more, than they do. And you see that all the time. And so, I just thought, that's not how I live my life. That's not how I think. That's not, like, if I'm gonna take an engineering class, like, I want to be the best in my engineering class, even if I don't ever want to be an engineer. Like, it's just this competitive spirit I have about not cheating things. And so, but I think when I had the opportunity, the thing that I learned really, really quickly, and it's the lesson, when people ask me, like, what's the one thing as a new coach that, like, I have to know? And it's like, my one lesson to all new coaches is that you have to figure out where a person is at and pull them closer to where you think they can be, but never assume they're going to get to where you want them to go. It's like, how do you meet them? And if your goal as a coach is to play the players that work the hardest, you may not be in this profession very long, because the reality is you have to play the players that give you the best chance to win. And it's not always your hardest workers. It's not always the players that want it the most, and you certainly can build a team full of, like, really hard workers, but against a more talented team, you might get yourself in trouble at times. And so it's kind of figuring out, like, how to, kind of meet them where they're at and pull more out of them than they think they have. But you may never get them to where you think they can go. But it's like, if you get them a little further than they think they can go, then you've done something. And so I think, that was the challenge. That's the corner I kind of turned, in terms of, okay, I love basketball so much and I'm not ready to, like, say goodbye to it. So, okay, I'll coach and figure out if this is something I might want to do right now. But I don't think when I started that I thought, okay, 25 years later, I'm going to still be doing this. Like, I just wasn't on that path of I'm going to take this job now and I'm going to be the next Pat Summit, or I'm going to be the next, I wasn't going to be the next anyone. I was just going to figure out if I enjoyed being a part of the game. So I think that's, in a nutshell, in some ways, that's how my career has meandered. It's like I've always loved it. I've always touched it in some way. Even when I was a stay-at-home mom, I was still doing some high school TV games, and I was still doing some scouting from home. And I like never took, um, the pulse never left me. It's just, it looked a little different, at times. But I think every stage, I learned a little bit more about the game, or took a slightly different approach to it. And so, I don't think there's one right way to get here. But I think if you're committed and you love it, and, you're passionate about it, you have to have things go right. I mean, it's silly. Like I always say, like, I grew up with a dad who did not say, hey, you can do whatever you want, as long as you're willing to work for it. Like that didn't exist in my house. I always joke that my dad would always say, like, figure out what occupation you can do that makes you enough money so that you can do the things you're passionate about. And so it was kind of like, it was a very different approach to how, and yet I do something that I'm incredibly passionate about, and I don't, and it's not about the money, but it's the idea of, I think sometimes we try to say, hey, you can be anything you want. And let's be realistic. Not everyone can be what they want. Not everyone's can wake up one day and say, I'm going to be an astronaut, and 10 years later or 20 years later is going to be an astronaut. Like sometimes we have to be realistic about what we're capable of doing, and then what's the path to get there. And so as much as, you want to be motivational, you also have to take a realistic approach in life, because otherwise, are you going to meet any benchmarks? And so are you going to be disappointed along the way if you have this one goal and it's not really conceivable? So I think that's the weird part about being a parent. You just want your kids to be happy, but you want to kind of guide them to the point of like, okay, here's some things you're good at. Maybe you should fall in love with this, because it's maybe this other thing isn't exactly, the right thing, and help them figure that out themselves. But I think sometimes we get going down these paths of, if you love it and you're willing to work for it, you're going to get it. Like if that were the case, I'd probably still be playing. you know
That's true. It's interesting. There's a lot of things that went through my mind when you talked about that. And you didn't just learn about the game and the peripheral components. You learned a lot about yourself along the way too, which helps you form your philosophy, which is not something you necessarily know in the beginning, except maybe work ethic or some of the things that got you to that point. But I want to ask you about what you said about, you didn't say it in so many words, but this is, I think what you were saying is fairness versus equality. And is that something that you talk about, or did you talk about this at the college level when you were an assistant? And now with the dream, do you share that right from the jump in your first meeting and say, listen, ladies, we're not all the same. Everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. And all I want to see is the evolution of you individually, which will help us collectively because the sum of the parts is greater than the parts themselves. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in equality. Is that what you share with them right from the jump?
Pretty much. And I think there's different ways to say it. But yeah, and the other thing I say, and anyone can steal it if they want to, because I'm sure I stole it from somebody. But the idea of like, if you're a player and you consider me a bank, you have a choice every day to make deposits or make withdrawals, and for every time you make a deposit, like you're building equity with me, so that if you have a bad day, if you need something, if it's super easy for me to say, take that withdrawal and run with it. Like, but if you're someone that's constantly asking, is constantly making withdrawals, you need something, you're tired today, you're this, you're that, then there's that reputation is built. Like, who do you want to be, And so, I think it's even that way. Like if you want to have the best relationship with me, like use every opportunity to make deposits, and then I've got your back, and I think the pro game is different than the collegiate game in a lot of ways. There are similarities, there are differences, but it's really about winning, and sometimes it's about managing personalities more than it is about managing playing time or managing a game. It's about, keeping people kind of in a good place mentally, physically, from a recovery perspective. And so you don't treat everybody the same. You can't, and I do treat people fairly. I'm sure there are examples where plenty of players would say that I didn't, because we all come from a different perspective, and so it's, I really feel like at my level, so often my job is to walk alongside, my players, as opposed to in college where you're that mentor and you're always kind of in front of them and leading them and pulling them along. Sometimes my biggest job is to walk alongside of them, to see, their perspective, and whether it's from the Black Lives Matter movement to game prep and game planning, and a player having a feeling like they have an advantage, and me being willing to have that conversation on the sideline and say, okay, I'm going to come back to you. You don't see a lot of college kids, going up to Gino and saying, I want the ball right now. He's going to tell him, I'm going to give you the ball right now. And so I think there's different challenges at every level. But I think you learn at our level, really how to manage personalities and, kind of figure that component out as much as anything.
Yeah, there's been a lot of evolution in the game, and a lot of crossroads and lightning bolts, and you mentioned Black Lives Matter. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I want to ask you one question. You didn't always sound and feel as confident as you sound and feel right now when you were coaching, because just like a natural progression, we question ourselves. Is this the right thing after 5 years, after 10 years, or 15 years? So you took some time off for your family, and you're hired at Arkansas by your husband, and put you in charge of the defense. And you went from 86th to 10th in the country at Arkansas for after four straight empty trips to the NCAA tournament. Tell everyone what that did for you more than anything. The win's great and everything, but what did that do for your confidence? And was that the aha moment?
I think it was definitely one of them. And I think you become, the more time you spend around the game, the more confident you become with your decision making. And certainly that was a unique opportunity, because when he told me okay, here's the defense, there wasn't this is what we're doing, you just run it. It was, no, 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 no. Like, you figure out what's this team's going to be good at. This is our personnel, our personnel. And so I just spent a lot of time, like, I mean, back then, it was like, okay, I'm going to watch Dick Bennett's pack line defense, and I'm going to watch film on Tom Izzo, and I'm going to watch, and those two guys became a little my disciples, Tom Izzo as much as anybody, in terms of philosophically where we were pushing people and things like that, and the physicality and the rebounding side of it. But, it was also studying, what are teams running? Like, what are most teams running now? Like, the Princeton action had started to come in. So what's the best way to guard Princeton? So I would watch Princeton teaching videos and just think about, okay, what's the best way to guard this? Do we switch? Do we do this? And, so a lot of it comes back to like work ethic, being willing to figure out based on your roster. I thought, I've got really good athletes, but I don't have better athletes than Tennessee, LSU, and so figuring out how we can be successful and building it, and really building it foundationally, and fundamentally, and starting every day kind of the same way, maybe tweaking it, but, and so, it was one of those situations where we were able to get player buy-in pretty quickly. And we won a lot of games that year because we held our opponents down, as opposed to being like an offensive juggernaut. But, it was the moment, kind of, we made the NCAA tournament that year. We're in the second round of the NCAA tournament. We're playing at A&M, and they're dismantling us. I mean, there's just nothing other than to say, sometimes you can have the best game plan, and an offense is just better than you that day. And we were playing in front of a big crowd at A&M, and Kelsey Bone was kicking our butt on the low block. And so, it was kind of like, okay, let's try 2-3 zone. Well, we tried 2-3 zone, and they were hammering us on whatever side our small forward was on. They were really getting to the diagonal pass and really doing a good job taking advantage of that. And so I remember, like, for the first time, literally the entire season, I looked at my husband and said, "What the hell do you think we should do here?" You know? And
Wow.
he's like, "Well, that's what I hired you to do. Figure it out." I mean, it
Hmm.
was there, that's all I got, walking into the timeout. So I remember like walking into the timeout because it was the one thing about the autonomy that I got in terms of handling the defense was always going into the huddle first, and having the players to myself and being able to make adjustments. And so your confidence grows every time you make an adjustment and it works. Every time you make an adjustment and the players buy in, every time you take away someone's right shoulder and the players are like, "Wow, she can't score. I just took her right shoulder away." "Okay, coach, I got it." So that the next time you ask them to do something, they have full buy-in because they've seen it work. And so I remember going into that huddle and saying, "All right, you guys, we're going back to the 3-2 zone. So we keep our bigs, connected to their bigs. And, like, I
Hmm.
know we put this in before we played Tennessee like 8 weeks ago, and we did it for one game and it worked for about 4 minutes. And then we didn't practice it enough to really, kind of understand all the,
Yeah.
ways that we need to tweak it against certain actions." And so I said, "We're going back to that." But gosh, if they get into horns, we'll just play it like man. We'll rise our posts up, and we'll almost play it like our man-to-man defense. And so I gave them those two rules, and it came down to a 1-point game with a chance to win the game. And I remember going through the line after the game, and Gary Blair's this way with everybody, but he handshakes for like 7 hours. I think it's the one thing about the pandemic that Gary like misses more than anything is the whole like
Right.
he has to wave at his opponents rather than talk to every single player and coach along the way. But he just pulled me aside and was like, "Now Nikki, that 3-2 zone, like." And it was just, and it was one of those moments, you say those aha moments where you go in that split second where I had to make a decision that was, and then not just make the decision, but convince the players that it was the right decision, so whether you're confident or not, like if you exude confidence, they feel it, and I think
Yeah.
that's a big part of coaching. Like you don't get player buy-in, whether I always say like, when I have assistants that work for me or when I was working with other assistants and it's your scout, like you got to sell it. I mean, your scout has to be sold, and I think that's a big part of coaching is if you get the players to believe that whether you're trapping ball screens or hedging ball, whatever you're doing, you got
Yeah.
to sell it. You got to tell them why. Younger players, you don't have to tell why. Sometimes pros, they need to know the why. But I
Yeah.
think it's all about getting that buy-in. But you talk about, whether it was an aha moment, it was a moment where I thought, yeah, I really can do this. Like I can make hard choices in big moments and felt good about it, afterward. Didn't feel good about losing, didn't,
Yeah.
but yeah, you have those moments all along the way. And, it's no different when I came to the pro game and was working for Kurt Miller in Connecticut. I thought, okay, 18 to 22-year-olds think I know what I'm doing, but will 32-year-olds,
Right.
really, really buy in? I've never coached in the pros. Like, is it going to be the same? And you learn pretty quickly that, even going to the Hawks training camps, we're all doing the same thing. We're all
Yeah.
coaching the same sport. We have different resources, talent, size, all those things, but essentially we're all doing the same thing. But I remember at the end of my first year um, in Connecticut, we do exit interviews on the way out. And our point guard, Jazz Thomas, as we were doing this exit interview, said that in all our years of playing, that I was the coach that did the best job of kind of getting sometimes intricate, difficult things and making them seem less complicated and easy and us
Hmm.
capable of doing them, and it's kind of that
That's
whole,
cool.
how are you communicating that information so they can understand it, believe in it, want to do it. And so that was another one of those moments where I thought, okay, like I can do this. I can do hard things, it's kind of is. And
Hmm.
it's
That's cool.
those things that just like build your confidence going forward, kind of each and every step of the way. And you're always going to have new moments, a late game situation. The first time you get in that late game situation as a head coach and something you do works, like we do this silly thing when I had Tiffany Hayes my first year, where we were in so many late game situations where we had to inbound the ball. So if we were in the front court, I'd put my entire team in the back court except for Tiffany Hayes, and just give her an entire half a court to get open, and the the first time we did it, I remember like Indiana looking at us like they're looking at Pokey Chapman going like, do we go down there? Where do we go? And my staff's looking at me, the players are kind of laughing. And then they realize like, I mean, Tiffany Hayes is one of the fastest players on the
Right.
planet. Like,
Yeah.
and she shoots 90% from the foul line in late game situations. All we have to do is give her space to get open. And so it kind of became our thing, but I'd never seen anybody else do it. But I just thought, like, why not give a player that has as this huge advantage, space to do it? And so, then you just kind of high five your staff after it works and everyone's laughing and like, wait, what just happened? And the amazing thing was it was really hard to scout, because if you think about the camera, where the camera goes, they're not even showing all the people in the backcourt and what we were doing back there, right? So nobody even knew like that we were playing next, what the heck happened back there. All they saw was an offensive and a defensive player, down here trying to get open. So yeah, I mean, you just have those moments in coaching where things work that you go, yeah, I know what I'm doing.
That's cool. So you finish your college coaching career. You go work with Curt Miller, who's a good friend of yours. And so what did you learn there before you knew you were like, I'm ready to be a head coach? Either I don't want to be an assistant coach anymore, or like I want to run my own show.
Yeah, I don't, it's funny. I wasn't even thinking that way. I mean, I think that's just, in some ways I'm not, I always tell people like, from a personal perspective, losing, I lost my sister to a super short battle with cancer. She was 41 at the time. I was 38. And it was one of those moments where you just say, okay, this whole like 5-year plan thing, let's throw that out the window. The decision to go work for Curt was simply a decision of, this feels right now. Like I didn't have this dream of coaching in the WNBA, but Curt and I had always wanted to coach together. So it was kind of the first opportunity we'd had since like 1999, 2000, when we worked together at Colorado State. And so, it was just a unique opportunity. And I thought, let me try this. This seems right now. And I just really enjoyed it. And we had a really good team coming back. I wasn't, I always say, if you're always looking for something and you're not happy where you're at, then you may never be happy where you're going. But I think what made my situation here so organic was I was really happy where I was at, and I loved coaching there. And I wasn't thinking, am I ready? Is this something I want? I was just doing my job. And I think what I learned there is that, it's the same as every coach I've ever worked for. I mean, when you're an assistant coach, your job is to figure out how you fit, how you can make that program better. And, when I worked with my husband, he was good cop and I tended to be bad cop, like when I worked for Carl Semesco and, he's just this meticulous planning, I was the fun guy, like just made them laugh and enjoyed, kind of, I mean, I always say like at FGCU, the game was close until about 4 minutes into the second quarter. And then we'd put about a 20-4 run on someone and it would be like nothing but smiles and high fives the rest of the time. So
just like yesterday,
exactly. Like there wasn't a ton of stress, in terms of being on that sideline, but it was figuring out Carl, who wins like nearly 90% of his games, like how can I provide here? How can I give something that's different, whether it's a perspective? And I think, he and I built this really, really good camaraderie in terms of our communication. And I learned a lot from him. I learned different ways to do things. And some of them, don't translate as well to the pros. And some of them, as simple as they sound, getting in a spread situation with a shooter in the corner and a lane line open it might be the basis of, a lot of the motion stuff he runs. And so, but I think with Curt, sometimes it was just being his translator. I mean, he's so smart and we think so similarly in terms of game plans and execution and things like that. But our communication styles are very different, and so, I just kind of learned to be sometimes the translator. Like, I know this is what he said, but, or how he said it, but here's what he wants, and like kind of, so I think every step along the way when you get into coaching and you're an assistant coach, if you're not learning, you might as well get out. Like if you're always thinking about, I want my own team, I want to run my own program, then you're not taking advantage of the situation you're in. Because I look back and when people say like, who are your mentors? Like, I don't know that I'm not someone that has the same philosophy as anyone I've coached with, but I have pieces of everyone, because I think over time, if you're paying attention, you're going to pull the best of everybody and figure out in the situation you're in, whether it's personnel based or it's how you want to build your roster at our level, like this is what I want to look like and this is why, and it's based on experience. And so, I think Kurt, especially in year 2, had kind of given me that same defensive coordinator title, put me in the huddles, so now I'm in the huddle, that first, 45 seconds of a timeout, getting to make those adjustments. And I think that is the easiest transition in terms of knowing you're ready is having their ears, being able to make those adjustments, being able to game plan and say, no, we're jamming screens this game. And you know what, if it doesn't work, I gotta get us out of it, And so I think that's how you're ready, but you don't, I wasn't ready until, when I took the job here, I still didn't know if I was ready. I don't
Yeah.
think I don't think there's, to me, and everybody could be different. I didn't say like, this is where I have to be. This is where I mentally I'm at, where I need to run my own program or my own franchise. It was simply, this is a really cool opportunity. And how do I make it work? And so, you take the job and the next day you make your list just like you would any other day. And you say, okay, well, today I need to hire an assistant coach, or I need to start calling coaching candidates, and I need to, who are the free agents? And so you just start working, and if you have good work ethic, you figure out that list, and then you figure out the people that that help you build that list. Cause it's like, what am I missing? Cause I'm sure I'm missing a million things. I've never been a head coach before. So you start asking people, and that's why you network. Like, that's why, you have the people in your life that you do, because they're the people when you have questions, like, will take your call.
So have you called Coach Izzo lately?
He's definitely never been on speed dial. I can say that. I will say this is really cool. Like he, I watched so many of his videos, and I
Yeah.
love like the toughness side of his teaching and all of that. But I have like an AAU teammate from when I played for the Wisconsin Viking Club back in the day,
Wow.
whose son now signed with Michigan State.
Wow.
They're from Chicago, and so he'll be a freshman at Michigan State next fall. And I just thought that was so cool. One, I'm like, how are we this old? That you have a son that's going to be going away to college. Like time
Wow.
goes by so fast, because I
Yeah.
always say I'm like 45 going on 14. But yeah, no, I would call him someone that I like, a mentor in terms of learning. I don't really have that personal relationship with him.
That's interesting. Well, his assistant, Doug Wojcik, I've known for a long time, and I talked to him a lot this year. So just let me know. I got you.
Yeah, big day for them. Sneaking in, huh?
I know, craziness. That concludes part 1 of the interview with Nicki Collen, head coach of the Atlanta Dream of the WNBA. We can't thank you enough for joining us today. Remember, you can always send us an email to thesportsdeli@gmail.com or DM us on Instagram @Mike Hootner or on Twitter @Michael Hootner. Remember, your voice matters when fighting systemic racism. Read a book, acknowledge your white privilege, watch a movie about institutional racism, call your local or state representatives, and or have a conversation with someone that doesn't look like you so that we can change the economic, educational, police, housing, and prison narratives that currently need to be changed in this country. Remember, the Sports Deli is sponsored by SportRx. You can contact them at 888-831-5817 and talk to a live optician. And don't forget to enter the code DELI10 at checkout for your 10% discount. Please mask up. Remember, Black Lives Matter. And don't forget to check out part 2 of this amazing interview with Nicki Collen, head coach of the Atlanta Dream, right here in the Sports Deli. For Dr. J, I am Hootie Hoot. Until next time, peace.